Today is May 3rd, 2026, and something happened this morning that you absolutely need to understand because it tells you everything about where this Iran situation is actually heading. The Mullahs opened their mouths again, and within hours, U.S. Central Command answered them, not with words, not with a press conference, not with a strongly worded diplomatic statement, with fresh combat. Imagery of A-10 Warthogs, engines running, weapons loaded, sitting hot on the ramp somewhere inside the CENTCOM area of responsibility, ready to execute. That is the entire story in one image. But let's back all the way up, because to understand what happened today, you need to understand what's been building over the last 24 to 48 hours, and why the timing of everything you're watching right now is anything but a coincidence. Here's where we stand as of today. The ceasefire between the United States and Iran that was announced on April 7th and 8th of 2026 is still technically holding. Technically. But the situation on the ground looks nothing like a ceasefire. The U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports, which went into force on April 13th after the Islamabad talks between J.D. Vance and Iranian negotiators completely collapsed, is still very much active. CENTCOM has confirmed publicly that since April 13th alone, American naval forces have intercepted 48 ships and forced them to turn back. 48 ships in 20 days. That's not a ceasefire. That's an economic stranglehold being applied to what's left of the Iranian regime's income, and Iran, for its part, is still blocking the Strait of Hormuz, still controlling which ships pass and which ships don't, and still demanding over $1 million per vessel in transit tolls. So you have a dual blockade. The U.S. blockading Iranian ports from the outside, Iran choking the strait from the inside. And sitting between those two forces is roughly 20% of the world's entire seaborne oil supply, and about the same proportion of global liquefied natural gas. Every day this goes on, the pressure multiplies on both sides. Now Iran sent a 14-point response through Pakistani mediators on May 2nd, trying to lay out what they want in exchange for ending the war. I went through what's been reported from sources, including NPR, Tasneem, and Press TV, and I want you to hear what Iran is actually demanding, because this is where the regime completely lost the room. They want all issues resolved and the war ended within 30 days. They want the U.S. naval blockade lifted immediately. They want American forces withdrawn from what they're calling Iran's periphery. They want the frozen Iranian assets released. They want war reparations paid. They want sanctions lifted. And then, buried right at the bottom, they want a brand new mechanism installed to govern the Strait of Hormuz with Iranian control, baked directly into the framework. That last point is the nuclear option of diplomatic demands. That's the regime looking at a country that has destroyed more than 120 of your naval vessels, obliterated your air defenses, assassinated your supreme leader, and is currently running a blockade of your ports, and still demanding to be handed the keys to the world's most critical oil. Choke point. That is the level of detachment from reality we are dealing with in Tehran right now. President Trump heard all of that on May 2nd, and he responded the way he always does. He told reporters he would be reviewing the plan, but that he frankly didn't think he could make a deal. Then, in a Truth Social post that has since been quoted across every major news network, he wrote exactly this. He said he would soon be reviewing the plan that had just been sent, but could not imagine it would be acceptable, and that Iran had not paid a big enough price for what it had done to humanity and the world over the last 47 years. Read that again, slowly. A president of the United States, looking at a 14-point peace proposal from a country his military has spent 64 days systematically dismantling, and his response is that they haven't paid a big enough price yet. That is not a man who is about to soften his negotiating position. That is a man who is running out of patience with the entire conversation. And then, almost as if the IRGC needed to remind everyone exactly who they are, the rhetoric from Tehran in the last 24 hours escalated to a level that made even seasoned Middle East analysts stop and take notice. The IRGC intelligence arm published a statement claiming that the room for U.S. decision-making has narrowed. They wrote, and I want you to hear this carefully because this is the actual language coming out of Tehran right now. They said, Trump must choose between an impossible military operation or a bad deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's a direct quote carried across Iranian media and confirmed by CNN's live coverage this morning. The IRGC set a 30-day deadline for the U.S. to lift its naval blockade. And then, separately, a senior IRGC official warned that any new American attack, even a limited one, would result in long and painful strikes on U.S. positions across the Gulf region. A separate Iranian military spokesman, Brigadier General Mohammad Jafar Asadi, told state media that surprise measures are planned for the enemy beyond their imagination. Let's be very precise about the strategic context here, because this rhetoric didn't emerge in a vacuum. According to reporting by Axios on April 30th, CENTCOM had already briefed Trump on military options that include what's being described as a short and powerful wave of strikes. CENTCOM simultaneously requested deployment of the Army's Dark Eagle hypersonic missile to the region, as reported by Bloomberg, which is arguably the most significant weapons escalation signal since the opening night of Operation Epic Fury back on February 28th. So while Iran is threatening long and painful strikes and claiming the room for U.S. decision-making has narrowed, the Americans are quietly moving their most advanced long-range strike weapons into the theater. That gap between Iranian rhetoric and American capability is the most important thing you can understand about this entire situation as of May 3rd, 2026. So who exactly is making these threats right now? Who is actually in charge of Iran on May 3rd, 2026? Because this is the question that every analyst I've read across ISW, Reuters, Fox News, Times of Israel, and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies is trying to answer. And the answer is deeply disturbing if you understand what it means for any chance of a real peace deal. Let me walk you through what I found, because the picture that's emerging from multiple independent sources is not of a government. It's of a military junta operating behind a thin facade of Islamic law. When the United States and Israel launched the opening night of Operation Epic Fury on February 28, 2026, and Israeli strikes assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in Tehran, the regime's power structure didn't just lose its head, it fractured. And into that fracture stepped the IRGC. According to Reuters, reporting backed by 5 senior Iranian sources, the IRGC essentially forced through the selection of Mojtaba Khamenei, the assassinated leader's son, as the new supreme leader. The Assembly of Experts, the clerical body constitutionally responsible for selecting supreme leaders, was pressured, coerced, and in some cases simply not informed of the vote, which apparently took place at an undisclosed location after their hall in Qom was bombed. Some members publicly objected to the process. According to the Times of Israel, 8 members said they would boycott the proceedings entirely due to what they described as heavy pressure from IRGC commanders. The IRGC used the argument that the war required a fast process and a candidate who defied the United States. That is not a constitutional process. That is a coup wrapped in religious procedure. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Mojtaba Khamenei, the man nominally sitting at the top of Iran's power structure right now, suffered significant leg injuries in the same strike that killed his father and has not appeared publicly, reportedly communicating only through IRGC intermediaries or limited audio connections due to security concerns. He has been functionally absent. So while his title is Supreme Leader, the man actually running Iran's military and security decision-making, according to reporting from ISW, Fox News, and World Israel News, is IRGC Commander Major General Ahmad Vahidi. Vahidi is now reportedly making military and political decisions alongside Mojtaba Khamenei, with President Masoud Pezeshkian having been effectively blocked from key decisions. According to Fox News, Vahidi reportedly insisted that under wartime conditions, all critical and sensitive positions must be chosen and managed directly by the Revolutionary Guard until further notice. Think about what that actually means in practice. Iran's civilian president, Pezeshkian, who was elected in 2024 on a platform of moderation and diplomatic opening, has been reduced to a figurehead. He has reached what analysts are calling a complete political deadlock as tensions between his administration and the IRGC military leadership deepen. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, the man who actually flew to Islamabad and sat across from American negotiators, cannot make substantive concessions without IRGC approval. When he appeared to show flexibility during the Islamabad talks in April, Vahidi reportedly sent a loyalist specifically to monitor Araghchi's negotiations and report back if the foreign minister strayed from the IRGC's approved position. That is not a negotiating partner. That is a hostage situation dressed in diplomatic clothes. And this explains something critical that has puzzled Western analysts for weeks. Why does Iran keep rejecting proposals that would genuinely benefit the Iranian people? Why send a 14-point proposal demanding war reparations and the withdrawal of American forces while the U.S. Navy is intercepting your tankers and you're losing $435 million per day in import and export capacity, according to U.S. analyst estimates? The answer is Vahidi. According to PJ Media's analysis, drawing on ISW reporting, Vahidi is not going to keep power if he's seen as weakening in any way in negotiations with the U.S. The IRGC, under his direction, is not optimizing for what's best for the Iranian economy or the Iranian people. It's optimizing for the IRGC's continued grip on power inside Iran. Every time Araghchi moves toward a deal that might actually work, the hardliners in the IRGC pull him back. Every time pragmatic voices like Speaker Ghalibaf signal openness to American preconditions, Vahidi's network cuts across the communication chain. This is why Trump canceled the U.S. delegation's scheduled trip to Pakistan on April 25th. He told reporters it was because of infighting among Iran's leadership. He wasn't wrong. He just understated how severe that infighting actually is. Now, layer on top of this one more critical data point. IRGC Navy Commander Alireza Tangsiri was killed on March 30th, 2026, and no successor has been publicly announced, making it the longest command vacancy in the IRGC Navy's history. The Navy, the force responsible for the Strait of Hormuz, the fast attack boats, the mine-laying vessels, the drone swarms, has been operating without a confirmed commander for over a month. And in 2008, a decentralization reform distributed operational autonomy across 31 semi-autonomous IRGC corps, specifically designed to survive leadership losses. The same decentralization that makes the IRGC hard to kill also means that small unit commanders in the Strait can act without central authorization. This is not a stable command structure you can negotiate with reliably. This is a decentralized paramilitary organization with autonomous regional commanders, a functionally incapacitated supreme leader, a sidelined civilian president, and a hardline general running the show from the shadows. This is what the United States is staring across the table at right now. This is the counterparty to the ceasefire. This is the entity that sent a 14-point proposal demanding reparations and territorial control of the Strait, while A-10 Warthogs are actively hunting their fast attack boats. And this internal chaos explains why the language coming out of Tehran has escalated so sharply in the last 48 hours. When Vahidi's faction says things like the gates of hell or long and painful strikes, that is not a military threat calculated on the basis of actual capability. That is an internal political signal. It's Vahidi telling the remaining IRGC commanders, the clerical hardliners, and whatever's left of the regime's power base that he is not backing down, that he is in control, and that he is the man standing up to America. The tragedy of that posture is that it is being broadcast toward an adversary flying warthogs off your coastline, who has already destroyed more than 120 of your naval vessels. The audience for that rhetoric is not Washington. The audience is inside Iran, and that makes the situation significantly more dangerous, not less. Now let's talk about the A-10 Warthog, because when CENTCOM drops fresh imagery of this aircraft sitting on the ramp with engines running, that is not an accident, and it is not theater. That is a very specific and deliberate communication to a very specific audience. And if you want to understand why the IRGC's threats sound increasingly desperate with each passing day, you need to understand exactly what this aircraft does in this specific fight. Because no other platform in the American inventory is better suited for destroying precisely what Iran has left to threaten the Strait with. Let me take you inside the machine. The A-10C Thunderbolt II, which everybody with any sense calls the Warthog, was designed from the ground up with one primary mandate: kill armor, survive punishment, and stay over the fight longer than anything else in the sky. It was built for the tank fields of Cold War Europe. But what I found going through Air Force Times, The Aviationist, Air and Space Forces magazine, and 1945's detailed analysis is that the aircraft's design characteristics make it almost uniquely lethal for the specific type of fight unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz right now. And here is why that matters directly to what Iran is threatening today. The A-10 is armed with a 30mm GAU 8-OA Avenger cannon capable of firing 3 900 rounds per minute, AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and APKWS, laser-guided rockets, giving it the ability to engage the small, agile surface craft the IRGC Navy has long relied upon to threaten shipping in the Strait's confined littoral environment. But the raw firepower number alone doesn't tell you everything. What makes this weapon system uniquely terrifying for IRGC fast attack boat crews is the physics of the engagement itself. An IRGC fast attack boat is typically between 10 and 40 meters long. It is lightly constructed for speed. It carries absolutely no armor. The APKWS-2 laser-guided rockets, the AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and the GAU-8 Avenger cannon are all weapons that can be effectively employed against targets at sea, including small boats, along with various threats on land. A single 1-second burst from that Avenger cannon puts roughly 65 depleted uranium rounds downrange in a dispersed pattern across a target area. There is no fast attack boat on the planet that survives that engagement. None. But the cannon is actually not even the most strategically important thing about the A-10 in this fight. The most important thing is what the people at Army Recognition in 1945 identified clearly in their analysis: the loiter time. CENTCOM itself said it plainly. The AL-10 Thunderbolt II can loiter for hours, standing by and ready to execute a mission whenever needed. Faster jets, your F-35s, your F-16s, your F-15EX, they are phenomenally lethal, but they burn through fuel at rates that limit how long they can hang over a contested maritime environment. The A-10 can circle an area of the Strait of Hormuz for hours. It can operate under 1,000-foot ceilings with visibility of just 1.5 miles according to Air Force technical data. It can fly low and slow enough to visually sort small, dispersed threats moving through cluttered coastal waters, identify which boats are mine layers versus fishing vessels, and then engage with whatever weapon fits the target. Every hour A-10 is overhead is an hour in which a missile transporter, a swarm boat commander, or an IRGC coastal unit must hesitate, disperse, or remain hidden. That persistent overhead pressure is not a kinetic attack. It is psychological warfare applied continuously from the sky, and the IRGC has no answer for it. And the survivability of this aircraft is just as important as its lethality. I went through the technical specifications on this carefully because it directly addresses Iran's claim today that any resumed hostilities would bring pain to American forces. The A-10 was built around a titanium armored cockpit, what pilots call the bathtub, that protects the pilot and critical flight systems from ground fire, including rounds up to 23 Mealer. Its flight controls are redundant and can be operated manually if hydraulics are destroyed. Its fuel tanks are self-sealing. Its two engines are mounted high on the tail, separated from each other, meaning you can lose one and still fly. In the post-air defense environment of the 2026 Iran conflict, it has become an economical apex predator. Its ability to absorb small arms fire and loiter over the Strait of Hormuz provides a persistent overwatch that faster, more expensive fifth-generation jets simply cannot match. You're looking at an aircraft that was specifically designed to get hit, keep flying, and keep killing. That's not a piece of marketing. That has been demonstrated in combat, including during Operation Epic Fury itself. Now, here's the operational picture as of today, May 3rd, 2026, that puts all of this in full strategic context. The 75th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron has been operating 30 A-10s in theater, starting with 12 original aircraft and expanding to include 18 reinforcements, hunting Iranian naval assets since the opening days of Operation Epic Fury. According to the Joint Chiefs, Chairman General Dan Kane at his March 19th Pentagon briefing, confirmed by Air and Space Forces magazine, the Warthog is hunting and killing fast attack watercraft in the Strait of Hormuz. And the results speak for themselves without any additional commentary needed. U.S. forces have destroyed over 120 Iranian naval vessels and 44 mine-laying watercraft since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. 120 vessels, 44 mine layers. That is the naval arm of the IRGC being systematically disassembled from the air by an aircraft that the Air Force tried to retire. And now, according to Army Recognition's detailed reporting, the U.S. is positioning additional A-10s for potential deployment alongside 80 2nd Airborne troops and additional Marine units as Washington reviews options ranging from maritime security operations all the way up to limited strikes or ground incursions. An A-10 surge does not announce a deeper strategic bombing phase. It points to preparation for a more intimate and more dangerous phase of war in which U.S. forces may need persistent armed overwatch close to a surface fight. So when the IRGC says today that they will open the gates of hell on any resumption of American strikes, understand what they're actually describing. They're describing an engagement with an aircraft that has spent the last 64 days literally hunting and killing their boats. They're describing a fight against a platform that can loiter over their remaining fast attack craft for hours at a time, carry 16,000 pounds of mixed ordnance across 11 weapon stations, fly through ground fire that would down other jets, and land back at base with holes in the fuselage that would be catastrophic on any other airframe. The IRGC's remaining naval force, after losing over 120 vessels, is drone boats, shoulder-fired missiles, and whatever fast attack craft haven't been found yet. The A-10 was built to find, identify, and destroy exactly those kinds of targets. Iran just told the world they're ready to open the gates of hell. What they forgot to mention is that the Warthog has been standing at their gate since February 28th. So let's bring all of this together into a complete picture, because what you're watching unfold today on May 3rd, 2026, is not just a diplomatic standoff. It's not just military brinkmanship. What you are actually watching is the final pressure phase of a strategy that has been running simultaneously on 3 tracks: financial, military, and psychological, and all 3 tracks are now converging at the same moment. And the question you need to be asking is not whether Iran's threats are real. The question is whether the regime has any viable path left that doesn't end with either a deal that strips the IRGC of the Strait or resumption of strikes that finishes the job Operation Epic Fury started. Let's start with the financial track, because the numbers here are genuinely staggering and they tell you everything about the clock Iran is actually working against right now. The Pentagon has confirmed that the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports, which has been in force since April 13th, has already cost Iran $4.8 billion in lost oil revenue. $4.8 billion in 20 days. That works out to roughly $240 million per day in direct oil export losses alone, and that is before you factor in the broader economic destruction documented this week by CNBC, the IMF, and Oxford Economics. The IMF estimated that the Iranian economy will shrink by 6.1% in 2026, with inflation running at 68.9%. Iran's currency has collapsed to around 1.32 million rial per US dollar. And critically, senior Iranian economic officials reportedly warned President Pezeshkian recently that it may take more than a decade to rebuild the war-torn economy. A decade. That's the internal assessment inside the regime's own government. The same government publicly threatening long and painful strikes against the United States. Sources familiar. With Iran's energy policy estimate, the Islamic Republic has a shrinking window of roughly 1 month to continue at current production levels before storage tanks fill up and it is forced to shut wells entirely. 1 month. After that, the damage to Iran's oil infrastructure becomes structural, not temporary. That's the actual countdown the mullahs are operating against today, not the rhetorical 30-day deadline they handed to Washington in their 14-point proposal. And here is where the strategic picture becomes genuinely fascinating from an analytical standpoint, because the IRGC hardliners running the show understand all of this. They know the numbers, they know the clock, and yet they still sent a proposal demanding war reparations and straight control. Why? Because the IRGC's survival inside Iran is now more important to Vahedi's faction than Iran's economic survival. If the IRGC accepts a deal that requires nuclear dismantlement and surrenders control of the Strait, they lose the two things that justify their entire existence as a power structure. The nuclear program was their long game, the card they planned to play decades from, now to make Iran untouchable. The Strait was their economic leverage over the entire global energy market. Remove both, and the IRGC becomes a paramilitary organization with no strategic purpose. Vahedi knows that, and that's why the threats keep escalating even as the economic foundation beneath the regime disintegrates in real time. But the United States is not operating on a single pressure track. That's what Iran keeps misreading, and it may end up being the most consequential miscalculation of this entire conflict. While the blockade drains Iran's treasury at $240 million a day, CENTCOM is simultaneously releasing imagery of A-10s on the ramp, briefing Trump on options for a short and powerful wave of strikes, and requesting deployment of the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile system to the theater. Each of those moves operates on a different pressure frequency. The blockade hits Iran's economy, the military imagery hits Iran's psychology, and the weapons requests signal to Tehran that the next phase of strikes, if they come, will not look like the last ones. Dark Eagle hypersonic missiles travel at speeds that compress Iran's response time essentially to zero. There is no intercept. There is no warning. You see the effect, not the weapon. That is a categorically different kind of military communication than anything that's been on the table since the ceasefire was announced on April 8th. So where does this actually go from here? I've spent hours going through analysis from ISW, CNBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, Oxford Economics, and PJ Media's Iran desk this week, and here is my honest assessment. The 14-point proposal Iran sent through Pakistan is not a serious opening position. It's a document designed for domestic consumption inside Iran, to show the hardliners and the IRGC rank and file that Vahedi didn't blink. Trump's response, that Iran hasn't paid a big enough price yet, is equally not a statement of diplomatic intent. It's a pressure signal designed to tell Tehran's pragmatic faction, Araghchi, Pezeshkian, anyone in the room who actually wants a deal, that the window is narrowing and the next escalation will be worse than what you've already seen. The real negotiation is happening somewhere between those two public statements, in back channels that neither side is acknowledging right now. What should concern you most as a viewer watching this unfold is the structural risk buried inside Iran's command fragmentation. When you have a supreme leader communicating only through audio because he's been wounded and is in hiding, a civilian president who's been politically handcuffed by the IRGC, a foreign minister who gets undercut every time he moves toward flexibility, and autonomous IRGC naval commanders in the Strait operating without a confirmed chain of command above them since March 30th, you have created all the conditions for an accidental escalation that nobody at the top actually authorized. One IRGC boat commander makes a decision. One drone swarm gets launched without central approval. One American minesweeper gets hit. And the ceasefire that's been holding since April 8th collapses overnight. That's not a prediction. That's a structural risk assessment based on what the reporting from multiple credible sources is actually telling us about who's in charge in Tehran right now. What you're watching today is the mullahs threatening the United States military with their loudest remaining weapon, words, because the kinetic weapons have been systematically degraded over 64 days of Operation Epic Fury. They threatened long and painful strikes. They said the gates of hell would open. And CENTCOM's answer was a photograph of the aircraft that had already killed over 120 of their naval vessels, sitting on the ramp, engines running, weapons loaded, going nowhere. That image says more than any press conference. That image says the gates you're describing are already open. And the Warthog has been standing inside them since February 28th. If you've made it this far, you already understand more about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz than most of the people covering it on cable news. Hit that subscribe button right now because this situation evolves every single day. And I am going to be here every single day breaking it down for you. Drop your prediction in the comments below. Does this ceasefire hold through May, or does the next escalation happen before the end of the month? I want to know what you think.